My name is Fiona. After an 18-hour hospital shift, I came home, but my stepmother changed the locks, and this is how my life spun into chaos the night I came home from an 18-hour hospital shift, only to find that my stepmother had locked me out of the house that I had grown up in. What started as exhaustion and disbelief turned into a war that tested everything I thought I knew about family, betrayal, and revenge. That day had already been brutal. Anyone who has worked in a hospital knows that time doesn't move in neat, little hours. It stretches, it bends, and it grinds you down until your body aches in places you didn't even realize could hurt. I had been on my feet for nearly 18 hours straight, running from one patient to another, answering calls, rushing through hallways, and making split-second decisions that carried the weight of life and death. By the time I finally clocked out, I was more than just tired. I was hollow. My scrubs clung to me, my shoes were soaked in a mix of disinfectant and sweat, and my eyelids felt heavier than the lead aprons in radiology. All I wanted in that moment was to go home, kick off my shoes, collapse into my bed, and shut the world out for at least a few hours. But when I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, something felt wrong. The lights inside were off, which wasn't unusual. But the porch light, the one my dad always kept on for me whenever I worked late, was dark. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe the bulb had finally burned out. I dragged myself to the front door, dug through my bag for my keys, and slid the metal into the lock. It didn't turn. Confused, I pulled it out and tried again, jiggling the handle the way I always did when it stuck. But it wasn't sticking. It wasn't jammed. It was different. That was when the sinking realization hit me. The lock had been changed. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe my brain was playing tricks after the endless shift. I pulled my key out and checked it again. Yep, the same one I'd used for years. I tried again, harder this time, my heart pounding as frustration mixed with fatigue. But no matter how I tried, the key wouldn't fit. I stepped back from the door, staring at it as if maybe the house itself would explain. And then I noticed the faint glow of a security camera perched near the entryway. That wasn't there before. My stepmother must have installed it recently. The pieces started to fall into place, slowly, painfully. My dad had remarried a few years ago after my mom passed away. At first, I tried to welcome my stepmother into the family. I really did. But she was never interested in being part of my life. She treated me like an outsider in my own home, like I was some temporary guest, taking up space. My dad, always eager to keep the peace, asked me to be patient with her, to try harder, to ignore the way she rolled her eyes at me or made little comments under her breath. But this was more than comments. This was deliberate. I was locked out of my own house, standing there on the porch in the dark. The exhaustion I'd been carrying all day twisted into something sharper: anger, humiliation, disbelief. I had just finished saving lives, putting every ounce of energy I had into helping strangers. And here I was, shut out like a stray animal. I called my dad, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through my phone. He didn't pick up. I tried again. Nothing. The truth settled over me like ice. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a burned-out bulb or a faulty key. My stepmother had changed the locks, and my dad had let her. I sat on the porch steps for what felt like hours, my body aching, my scrubs clinging uncomfortably to my skin, waiting for someone to come home, waiting for an explanation. But deep down, I knew I wasn't going to get one, not the kind I deserved, because this wasn't about a mistake. It was about control. Eventually, the weight of exhaustion forced me to leave. I drove to a friend's apartment across town, where I crashed on her couch, my body still buzzing with the ache of betrayal. But no amount of sleep could erase the image burned into my mind, that locked door, standing like a wall between me and everything I had known. In that moment, I realized something important. My stepmother wasn't just trying to push me out. She was trying to erase me. And if I didn't fight back, she just might succeed. But I wasn't about to let her win. The battle had only just begun. When I woke up on my friend's couch the next morning, the dull ache in my back was nothing compared to the heaviness pressing down on my chest. The events of the previous night replayed over and over like a cruel loop. Me standing at my own front door, my key useless, the porch light dark, the realization that I'd been deliberately locked out of the home I had known since childhood. I tried my dad again. This time he answered. His voice was groggy, like I had woken him up. But when I demanded to know why I couldn't get into the house, There was a pause that told me everything. He knew. He had known. And instead of admitting it outright, he mumbled something about needing to keep the peace, and how I had options. What he really meant was that my stepmother wanted me gone, and instead of standing up for me, he had chosen the path of least resistance, obedience to her. The betrayal stung worse than the exhaustion by the time I drove back to the house later that day. Sunlight washed over the street, making everything look deceptively normal. The garden was neatly trimmed. The mailbox stood straight, but the locks on the door were still new, and my key still didn't fit. I rang the bell. After a long moment, the door opened, and there she stood, my stepmother. Her face was perfectly composed, lips painted, hair pinned in place as if she had been preparing for this exact moment. Her eyes held none of the warmth a family member should offer. Instead, they carried satisfaction. Without raising her voice, she made it clear. The house was no longer my home. She said I had grown up, that it was time to move on, and that she and my father needed their space. It wasn't a conversation, it was a decree. Every word out of her mouth confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't about space. This wasn't about me being an adult. This was about her winning. She wanted control over every inch of that house, every decision, every moment of my father's attention, and in her mind, I was competition. I left without arguing. There was no point. But inside, something had shifted. The hospital had taught me discipline, resilience, the ability to keep moving, even when my body wanted to collapse. And now, that same discipline was going to carry me through this. I spent the next week piecing together what had really happened. First, I dug through property records. The house was still in my father's name, and by extension, tied to my late mother's will. My stepmother had no legal right to make changes without his consent, which meant not only had she changed the locks, she had convinced my father to let her. Second, I spoke with neighbors. Some admitted they had seen a locksmith's van parked outside a few days before, working on the doors, and even installing that new security camera I had noticed. One neighbor even mentioned that my stepmother had told them proudly she was securing the house from intruders. The word intruders stung, because I realized she had been referring to me. And finally, I checked in with relatives. A few of them had heard whispers, my stepmother spreading stories about how I was irresponsible, too busy with work to contribute at home, a burden on my father who needed a break from parenting. The lies spread like wildfire, and with every story she told, she tightened her grip on my father and isolated me further. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became, but beneath the anger was a sharp, focused determination. My stepmother had underestimated me. She thought exhaustion would break me down, that if she locked me out, I'd simply fade away quietly. She didn't realize that the same strength that carried me through endless hospital shifts would also fuel me here. I decided I wasn't going to beg her for access. I wasn't going to plead with my dad to intervene. I was going to fight for what was mine. Not just the house, not just a set of keys, but my place in the family, my dignity, my right to exist without being erased. That night, lying awake on my friend's couch, I mapped out the next steps in my head. First, I needed proof that she had overstepped her bounds, proof that she was manipulating my father, proof that she was spreading lies to paint me as a problem. Second, I needed allies, people who knew me, who could stand by my side when the time came, who could help me pull back the mask my stepmother wore so perfectly in public. And third, I needed patience. Revenge isn't rushed. It simmers, it builds, it waits until the moment is right. The door she locked had closed off more than just a house. It had closed off any illusion that we could coexist peacefully from here on out. This was a battle, and I was ready to fight it. The days that followed felt surreal. Every time I drove past the house I had once called home, I saw the security camera glinting under the porch light, a silent reminder that I was no longer welcome. My belongings were still inside, but my stepmother had turned the place into her fortress. It wasn't just about keeping me out. It was about rewriting the story of who I was, replacing my existence with her own narrative. And if I wanted to take back what was mine, I needed more than anger. I needed proof. I started small. The first step was documenting everything. I kept detailed records of every conversation with my father, every voicemail, every time I tried to reach him and got silence instead. I saved screenshots of text messages where my stepmother made passive-aggressive remarks that hinted at me being a burden. I noted the exact date I discovered the locks were changed, the locksmith's visit reported by neighbors, and the sudden installation of security cameras. Piece by piece, I was building a timeline. But I also knew I needed more than just my word against hers. My stepmother had perfected the art of manipulation. She could make herself look like a victim while painting me as entitled or unstable. To beat her, I needed to expose her for what she really was. So I went back to the neighborhood. I visited the older couple across the street, people who had known my parents for years. At first, they hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. But when I assured them that I wasn't asking for gossip, just the truth, they opened up. They told me about how my stepmother had paraded around after changing the locks, making little jokes about how the house feels lighter now without me. It hurt, but it was also useful. Next, I spoke with a cousin who had been invited over for dinner recently. He admitted, somewhat reluctantly, that my stepmother had spent most of the evening talking about me, criticizing my work schedule, claiming I was never around and that I took advantage of my father's generosity. She had painted a picture of me as an ungrateful daughter who didn't contribute and didn't care. The lies were spreading farther than I thought, and the more I dug, the more I realized just how methodical she had been. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision to change the locks. This was a calculated plan to push me out and tighten her hold on everything my mother had left behind. The final piece came unexpectedly. I had gone back to the hospital for another long shift, trying to distract myself from the chaos. When one of my coworkers pulled me aside, she told me she had seen my stepmother in the waiting room a few days earlier, talking loudly on the phone. My coworker hadn't caught every word, but she remembered one line clearly. Once Fiona's gone for good, it'll all be mine. That was it, the confirmation I needed. My stepmother wasn't just trying to get rid of me, she was trying to erase me completely from the family, from the house, from the legacy my mother had left behind. By now I had enough evidence to confront my father, but I knew that simply presenting it to him wouldn't work. He was too wrapped up in her lies, too blinded by her carefully constructed facade. If I confronted him directly, he'd side with her. He always did. So I needed to be strategic. I began compiling everything into a folder: neighbor testimonies, texts, screenshots, dates, even a written statement from my coworker. But I didn't stop there. I also started digging into financial records. My stepmother had never been subtle about her spending: new clothes, spa visits, unnecessary house upgrades. With my hospital schedule, I hadn't paid much attention before, but now I was looking closer, and what I found made my blood run cold. Large withdrawals, transfers into accounts under her name, purchases that clearly weren't for household needs but for herself. She wasn't just manipulating my father. Emotionally, she was bleeding him dry financially. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. My father had chosen her over me, allowed her to push me out of my home, and in return she was using him like an open wallet. But where my father saw love, I saw control. And now, I had the evidence to prove it. I wasn't going to rush into action just yet. Timing mattered. If I exposed her too early, she'd twist it back on me, claim I was jealous or vindictive. I had to wait until she was so sure of her victory that she wouldn't see the blow coming, and when it landed, it would destroy everything she had built. Late one night, sitting in the quiet of my friend's apartment, I looked at the folder I had assembled. It wasn't just papers and screenshots. It was a weapon I planned to use carefully, ruthlessly, and without hesitation. My stepmother thought she had won. She thought locking me out was the end of the story, but she was wrong. It was only the beginning. The folder sat on my desk like a silent promise. All the lies, manipulations, and theft were neatly contained between those covers, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. My stepmother had stripped me of a home, twisted my father against me, and treated me as though I were disposable. But the irony of it all was that she had no idea I had the power to unravel her carefully crafted image. I didn't want to make a mistake by rushing. If I moved too soon, she'd simply twist the narrative as she always did. So I began to test her quietly, strategically. It was time to start planting the seeds of doubt in my father's mind. The first opportunity came at a family dinner. My father had insisted I attend, despite my stepmother's reluctance. He framed it as an attempt to smooth things over, though I knew he wasn't aware of the depths of her schemes. She greeted me with that tight, performative smile of hers, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. I watched her carefully throughout the evening. She hovered near my father like a shadow, intercepting conversations, guiding his responses, always subtly making sure she was the center of his attention. But I knew something she didn't hide, had begun quietly sharing what I'd discovered with one or two trusted relatives. They were present that night, and I could see the curiosity flicker in their eyes as they looked at her. She was no longer untouchable. When the conversation turned to finances, casual talk about renovations and expenses, I noticed her body stiffen. My father laughed about how she'd been managing things so well. That was my chance. I casually mentioned how impressive it must be to juggle household costs with all the personal luxuries she seemed to enjoy. It was subtle, but effective. My father chuckled, but I saw the flicker of confusion cross his face, the kind of pause that suggested he hadn't realized just how much she'd been spending. My stepmother quickly redirected the conversation, her voice overly sweet, but the crack had appeared. And once a crack forms, it always spreads. Over the next few weeks, I played a careful game of letting small truths slip in just the right places. At gatherings, I'd mention things casually: her spa visits, the new jewelry, the shopping trips, always lightly, always as if I were complimenting her. But each time, I watched my father's eyes, saw the way suspicion slowly began to take root. The most telling moment came when I overheard them arguing late one night. I had come by to pick up a few boxes of my belongings, and while in the driveway, I caught her raised voice. She was trying to soothe him, insisting everything was fine, but he was pressing her with questions. He had never questioned her before. That was my first confirmation that my plan was working. Still, I knew I needed something undeniable, something so blatant that no amount of her manipulative charm could erase it. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One weekend, while I was visiting a mutual relative, I received a call from a friend who worked at a high-end boutique in town. She told me she'd just seen my stepmother come in, max out my father's credit card on several designer handbags, and then brag about how she deserved it after dealing with the stress of family drama. My chest tightened with a mix of rage and satisfaction. This was the proof that would expose her greed. I asked my friend to hold on to the receipts, which she gladly did. That evening, I placed copies into the folder alongside everything else I had gathered. That at this point, the evidence wasn't just strong, it was devastating. But I wasn't satisfied with simply catching her in financial lies. I wanted her facade to collapse in front of everyone, in a way that couldn't be repaired. I wanted her to experience the humiliation she had inflicted on me, the sting of being stripped of dignity and exposed for who she really was. So, I devised the next step of my plan. There was an upcoming family event, a formal dinner to celebrate my brother's promotion. Both sides of the family would be there, including relatives who had only heard bits and pieces of the tension between us. My stepmother would undoubtedly use the occasion to parade her control and charm, and that was precisely why it was the perfect stage. I made sure to prepare carefully. I arranged copies of my evidence, organized in such a way that it couldn't be dismissed as coincidence or rumor. I didn't intend to be the one to start the fire. I wanted her to set herself up. All I needed to do was wait for her arrogance to push her into a corner, and then watch as her mask shattered in front of everyone. The night of the dinner arrived. As expected, she was dressed to impress, clinging to my father with an air of superiority. She carried herself like a queen, certain that she held all the power. But as I walked into the room, folder tucked discreetly in my bag, I felt a calm determination settle over me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice for myself, for my mother's memory, and for my father, who was too blinded by infatuation to see the trap he was in. That as the dinner unfolded, I bided my time. I let her have the spotlight, let her bask in the admiration of those who didn't know the truth. She made her usual subtle jabs at me, painting herself as the gracious one who tolerated the difficult stepdaughter. People laughed politely, unaware of the venom behind her words. But then, she went too far. She made a comment, smug, calculated, about how she had saved the family finances from disaster after I supposedly abandoned responsibility. She said it with a sweet smile, but the words were sharp, aimed to wound. My father chuckled nervously, but I saw the tension in his jaw. He wasn't as convinced as he once had been. That was my moment. I reached into my bag, my fingers brushing against the folder. My heart pounded as I prepared to pull it out. I was seconds away from shattering her perfect little world. The air in the dining room was thick with tension. Crystal glasses clinked softly, silverware scraped against porcelain, and laughter bounced across the table in carefully curated waves. But beneath it all, there was an undercurrent I had been waiting for. My stepmother sat at the head of the table beside my father, smiling as if she owned the world. She basked in the praise, soaking up every comment about her elegance and management of the household. It was exactly the kind of stage she craved, the spotlight she thought belonged only to her. She leaned back, glass of wine in hand, and delivered her next blow. She spoke of responsibility, of sacrifice, of how she had saved my father from financial strain because, as she claimed, I had neglected my duties. She laughed lightly, her tone wrapped in sugar, but her eyes cut sharp in my direction. The table chuckled politely, as if they were in on the joke, but I didn't laugh, I didn't even flinch. Instead, I reached into my bag. My fingers touched the folder, the weapon I had been waiting weeks to use. My heart pounded, steady and controlled, not with fear but with resolve. This was the moment I had built toward, the moment where her lies would collapse, not just in whispers, but in front of every pair of eyes in that room. I placed the folder onto the table. The sound was quiet but firm, enough to turn heads. My stepmother's smile faltered for a second, just long enough for me to catch it. She masked it quickly, but the first fracture had appeared. I opened the folder and slid out a stack of receipts, designer handbags, luxury spa visits, jewelry, each one neatly documented. I placed them on the table like cards in a game, one by one. Conversations stilled, forks were set down, people leaned in. My father frowned, confused, his gaze flickering between the papers and my stepmother. He asked what it was, his voice tight with suspicion. I didn't need to say much. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. The receipts showed a pattern of extravagance that directly contradicted her image of frugality and sacrifice. The numbers didn't lie. For a moment, silence hung heavy over the table. Then, whispers began. Relatives leaned toward each other, murmuring, their eyes shifting from the receipts to her face. My stepmother laughed, too high-pitched, too forced, trying to brush it off as a misunderstanding. But I wasn't finished. Next came the screenshots of her texts, the little digs she had sent me, the manipulative comments about how I didn't belong in the house, how I was lucky she allowed me to stay. I passed them down the table. People read them, eyes widening, their whispers sharpening. The narrative she had woven was unraveling right there in front of them. Her voice rose as she tried to explain, her hands fluttering in frantic gestures. She insisted it was taken out of context, that I was twisting things to make her look bad. But her panic was showing. The calm, composed mask she always wore was slipping. And for the first time, everyone else could see it. I could feel every gaze in the room settling on her, not with admiration, but with doubt. The spotlight she had craved so desperately had turned harsh, unforgiving. But I wasn't done yet. The final blow came in the form of a written statement from my coworker. I handed it to my father directly, watching his eyes scan the words. In it, my coworker recounted hearing my stepmother brag about how once I was gone for good, everything would be hers. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face drained of color. He looked at her, his jaw tight, his hands trembling slightly as he held the paper. She sputtered excuses, claiming it was a lie, that my coworker was mistaken, that I had orchestrated it all. But the damage was done. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and worse for her, it was public. Relatives who had once been charmed by her polished demeanor now stared at her with suspicion. Their conversations hushed and sharp. Her control over the narrative was crumbling before her eyes. She turned on me then. Her voice rose, venom dripping from every word as she tried to shift the blame. She painted me as vindictive, jealous, incapable of moving on. She accused me of manipulating everyone, of creating some grand conspiracy against her. But it was too late. The harder she fought, the more desperate she looked. Her mask wasn't just cracking, it was shattering. And my father sat there in stunned silence, caught between the woman he thought he knew and the evidence stacked against her. For once, he didn't rush to her defense. For once, he didn't dismiss me. He just stared at her, his face carved in disbelief and hurt. The dinner ended in chaos. My stepmother stormed out, her composure gone, leaving behind whispers and stares. My father followed after her, but his steps were heavy, conflicted. The relatives lingered, exchanging glances that said everything words couldn't. I sat there quietly, the folder now half empty, the truth laid bare for everyone to see. There was no satisfaction in the silence that followed, just a strange, hollow calm, I had exposed her, but the war wasn't over. Not yet, because humiliation was only the first step. The real reckoning was still to come. The dinner had ended in whispers and shattered illusions. My stepmother had stormed out, my father trailing behind her, his face pale and unreadable. The relatives left soon after, murmuring amongst themselves, casting me looks of sympathy, curiosity, and, in some cases, newfound respect. I had exposed her, but exposure wasn't the same as resolution. The days that followed were heavy with silence. My father didn't call, neither did my stepmother. It was as if the house, the one I once called home, had sunk into a void. But I knew silence didn't mean peace. Silence meant plotting. And I wasn't about to let her regroup and spin another web of lies. I had more than receipts. I had proof of theft. I returned to my financial digging, poring over bank records I'd quietly gathered through joint accounts and statements addressed to the house. The picture became even clearer. My stepmother had been systematically draining funds for months, possibly longer. Lavish purchases, unexplained transfers, all under the guise of managing the household. But I found something even more incriminating: transactions tied to an account in her maiden name. One my father likely didn't know existed. She wasn't just reckless with his money. She was stashing it away, preparing for an escape plan in case everything collapsed. That discovery hit me harder than I expected, not because it surprised me by now. Nothing about her deceit shocked me, but because it confirmed just how little she cared for him. To her, my father wasn't a husband. He was a bank, and that was what finally gave me clarity. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about saving him, even if he had failed me when I needed him most. The opportunity came a week later. My father called, his voice strained, asking to meet. We sat in a quiet cafe, his shoulders hunched, his eyes lined with exhaustion. I could see it on his face. The doubt, the betrayal, the war inside him. He didn't defend her. He didn't accuse me. He simply asked if what I'd shown was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt his voice carry something I thought I'd lost trust. I slid the final set of documents across the table, the transfers, the hidden account, the proof of her siphoning money behind his back. His hands trembled as he looked through them. I didn't need to say a word. His silence was enough. That night, he went home and confronted her. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard about it afterward from neighbors. The shouting echoed down the street, her voice shrill, his voice breaking. By morning, she was gone. She didn't take much, just her clothes, her jewelry, and her carefully hidden account that she thought no one knew about. But she left behind a mess. My father was devastated, not just because his marriage had been a lie, but because he had chosen her over me. He had let her poison his view of me, let her lock me out, let her rewrite who I was. And now he had to face the truth that his blind loyalty had cost him a daughter. For a while, I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to celebrate. I had won. I had exposed her, dismantled her power, driven her out of the life she had tried to control. But another part of me ached, because no matter how sweet the revenge, it didn't erase the hurt. It didn't erase the nights I came home exhausted from the hospital, only to find myself unwanted. It didn't erase the memory of standing outside that locked door, realizing I had no place in my own home. And it didn't erase the fact that my father had let it happen. Still, there was a strange sense of closure. I moved forward with my life. I found a new place, small but mine. I poured myself into my work, into the patients who needed me, into the life I was building for myself, not defined by betrayal, but by resilience. My father reached out often. After that, he apologized more times than I could count, sometimes breaking down in tears, sometimes just sitting in silence on the other end of the phone. I forgave him, eventually, but not fully. Forgiveness is complicated. It wasn't about letting him off the hook, it was about freeing myself from the weight of resentment. As for my stepmother, she disappeared. Rumors surfaced that she had moved to another city, living off what little she had managed to take. But I didn't care. She was gone, stripped of her mask, her power, her carefully built image. She had locked me out of my home. In the end, she locked herself out of everything. Looking back now, I don't think of it as just revenge. It was reclamation. I took back my dignity, my truth, my place in the story she tried to erase me from. She thought she could control everything, my father, the house, even my identity. But the truth has a way of cutting through lies, no matter how carefully they're constructed. And the truth was simple. I wasn't disposable. I wasn't weak. I was the one who survived. And she was the one who lost everything.